Arthur Conan Doyle, The Terror of Blue John Gap. The records with which you are about to become acquainted were found among the papers of the late Honorable Dr. James Hardcastle, who passed away from tuberculosis on the 4th of February, 1908, in South Kensington. All who knew the deceased closely assert with one voice that the doctor, a man of analytical mind and exceptional judgment, was hardly capable of idle fantasies or hoaxes. Therefore, it is entirely out of the question that he could have invented this, to say the least, mysterious story. The records of the deceased were enclosed in an envelope inscribed, "A brief account of events and facts which took place in the spring of last year near the farm of the Mrs. Ellerton in northwestern Derbyshire." My dear Seton, it may interest you, or perhaps sadden you to know, that the irony with which you met my tale prevented me from telling it to anyone else. I leave these notes behind. Perhaps strangers will show me more confidence than my best friend. Inquiries made have failed to establish the identity of the mysterious Seton. I can only add that it has been proven with absolute certainty that Mr. Hardcastle did indeed stay at the Ellerton farm, and that a particular alarm did indeed grip the local population at that time. Following this somewhat lengthy introduction, I present the doctor's account without a single correction. It is written in the form of a diary, of which some entries are very detailed, while others are made only in the broadest terms. April the 17th. I already feel the beneficial influence of the wonderful mountain air. The Ellerton farm is situated at an altitude of 1,420 feet above sea level. The climate here is healthy and invigorating. Except for the usual morning cough, nothing bothers me. Fresh milk and sweet mutton allow me to hope for an increase in weight. I think Saunderson will be pleased. Both of the Misses Ellerton are very amusing and sweet. They are industrious little old maids. All the warmth of their hearts, which should have comforted husbands and children, they are ready to give to me, a stranger and an invalid. Old maids are the most useful people in the world. They are the reserve forces of society. Sometimes they are called superfluous women. But, my God, what would become of poor, superfluous men without their heartfelt sympathy? By the way, in their simple heartedness, they soon revealed to me why Saunderson recommended this particular place. It turns out the professor is a native of this region, and I am sure that in his youth he chased crows in the surrounding fields more than once. The farm is the most secluded spot in the district. Its surroundings are strikingly picturesque. At the farm, there is a pasture stretching along the bottom of a winding valley. On all sides, it is surrounded by limestone hills of the most whimsical shapes. They are composed of such soft rock that it can be broken with one's fingers. The whole area is a vast hollow. It seems that if you struck it with a giant hammer, it would boom like a drum. Or perhaps it would cave in and reveal a vast subterranean sea beneath. But a large lake, I warrant, must be there, for the streams running here from all sides disappear into the bowels of the mountain. There are many clefts in the rocks everywhere. Passing through them, one can discover wide caverns plunging down into the depths of the earth. I have a small bicycle lamp. It gives me great pleasure to walk with it through these mysterious, deserted places and admire the fairy tale silver and black reflections playing on the cave walls when I cast the beam upon the stalactites adorning the majestic vaults. Extinguish the light, and before you are visions from the Arabian Nights. One of these fissures in the rocks has interested me particularly, for it is a creation not of nature, but of human hands.
Before arriving here, I had never heard anything of Blue John. This is the name given to a unique mineral of a remarkable violet hue. It is found in only 1 or 2 places on the globe and is exceedingly rare. A simple vase fashioned from Blue John is worth a great sum of money. The Romans, with their extraordinary instinct, discovered this rare mineral in this very valley. To extract it, they drove a horizontal tunnel deep into the womb of the mountain. The entrance to the mine, which everyone here calls the Blue John Gap, is an archway hewn into the rock. It is now heavily overgrown with bushes. The Roman miners excavated an impressive tunnel. It crosses several deep hollows through which water flows. By the way, when entering the Blue John Gap, do not forget to make marks along your path and, of course, provide yourself with candles. Otherwise, you will never find your way back to the daylight. I have not yet entered the tunnel itself. On that day, standing at the entrance and peering into the black, silent distance, I made a vow. As soon as my health is restored, I shall devote several days to exploring these mysterious depths to determine how far the ancient Romans penetrated into the heart of the Derbyshire hills. It is astonishing how superstitious the country folk are. I, for one, had a better opinion of young Armitage, a man of some education, firm character, and generally a fine fellow. I was still examining the entrance to the Blue John Gap when he crossed the pasture and approached me. "Oh, doctor," he cried out excitedly. "Are you not afraid?" "Afraid? Of what?" I asked in surprise. "Of the monster that dwells here in the tunnel." And he pointed a finger into the darkness. How easily legends are born in remote rural districts. I questioned him about the reason for his strange agitation. It appears that, from time to time, sheep disappear from the pasture. According to Armitage, someone or something carries them off. He refused to even listen to my suggestions that the sheep might have wandered off on their own and become lost in the mountains. Once, a pool of blood and tufts of wool were discovered, he said. I remarked, but that can be explained by perfectly natural causes. Blood and tufts of wool prove nothing. The sheep disappeared only on dark, moonless nights. However, ordinary sheep stealers usually choose such nights for their raids, I countered. There was an instance, Armitage insisted, when someone made a breach in the rock and tossed huge stones a considerable distance away. Now that perhaps is the work of human hands, I agreed. Armitage concluded his arguments by swearing that he himself had heard the roar of some beast, and that anyone who stayed near the tunnel long enough could also hear this distant cry of incredible power. I could not help but smile at this, for it is well known that such sound can be caused by the erosive work of subterranean waters flowing through deep fissures in limestone rock. My incredulity angered Armitage. He turned sharply and walked away. And then something mysterious happened. I was still standing near the entrance to the tunnel, pondering Armitage's words, when suddenly, from its depths, an extraordinary sound reached me. How can I describe it? First of all, it seemed to me that the sound came from a far, far distance, from somewhere in the very bowels of the earth. Secondly, contrary to my first impression, it was very loud. And finally, it was not a rumble, a crack, a crash, or anything else usually associated with falling water or stones. It was a howl, tremulous and vibrating like the neighing of a horse. I waited near the Blue John Gap for another half hour, perhaps even longer. The sound, however, did not repeat. Deeply intrigued by what had occurred, I went home, firmly resolved to inspect the tunnel in the very near future. Of course, Armitage's arguments were too absurd to believe. But that strange sound, it still rings in my ears as I write these lines. April the 20th. In the last 3 days, I have made several excursions to the Blue John Gap and have even penetrated the tunnel for a short distance. Unfortunately, my bicycle lamp is too weak, and I do not risk going any further with it. I have decided to act more methodically. I have heard no more sounds and am ready to conclude that I was the victim of a common hallucination, presumably triggered by Armitage's story. Of course, it is absolutely absurd from start to finish, and yet the bushes at the entrance to the shaft look as though some bulky creature had forced its way through them. I am becoming more and more interested in this business. I have said nothing to the Misses Ellerton. They are quite superstitious enough as it is. I have purchased several candles and intend to conduct further investigations on my own. This morning, I noticed that one of the many tufts of wool scattered in the bushes near the shaft was stained with blood. Of course, common sense suggests that as long as sheep wander over steep rocks, they may easily injure themselves. And yet, that bloodstain startled me so much that I recoiled in horror from the ancient archway. It seemed as though a foul breath were streaming from the black depths into which I gazed. Could it be that, in truth, some unknown and mysterious creature lurks down there? Hardly would such thoughts have occurred to me were I in good health. But when one's health is broken, one becomes morbidly sensitive and more susceptible to all manner of fantasies. I began to waver in my resolution and was almost ready to abandon the attempt to penetrate the secret of the abandoned shaft. However, tonight my interest in this mysterious affair has flared up again, and my nerves have strengthened somewhat. I hope to engage in a more detailed inspection of the shaft tomorrow, April the 22nd. I shall try to set down as minutely as possible the extraordinary occurrences of yesterday. I set out for the Blue John Gap after midday. I confess my fears returned the moment I peered into the depths of the shaft. I dearly wished that someone else might share in my exploration. Finally, having nerved myself, I lit a candle, pushed my way through the thick undergrowth, and entered the mine. It descended at a sharp angle for a distance of about 50 feet. The floor was covered with fragments of stone. From there began a long, straight tunnel hewn out of the solid rock. I am no geologist, yet I noticed at once that the walls of the tunnel consisted of a harder rock than limestone. Everywhere, the marks left by the picks of the ancient miners were visible. They were so distinct, these marks, that they might have been made only yesterday. Stumbling at every step, I trudged down the tunnel. The glimmering candle illuminated only a small circle around me with its dim, flickering light, making the shadows in the distance seem even darker and more threatening. At last, I reached the point where the tunnel opened into a cavern through which a swift stream ran. It was a giant of a cavern. From its ceiling and walls hung long, snow-white icicles of calcareous deposits. From the central cavern, as I could dimly discern, branched numerous galleries along which subterranean streams wound their fanciful ways, disappearing somewhere into the bowels of the earth. I paused in hesitation. Should I return or go deeper into this perilous labyrinth? Suddenly, my gaze fell upon the ground beneath my feet, and I froze in astonishment. Most of the floor of the shaft was strewn with rock fragments or a hard crust of limestone. But at this spot, water dripped from the high vault, forming a fairly large patch of soft mud. In the very center of it, I saw a huge, sunken impression, deep and wide, of an irregular shape, as if a large stone had fallen there from above. But no large stone was to be seen nearby. Indeed, there was nothing at all that could explain the appearance of that mysterious track. And this print was far larger than the track of any animal existing in nature. Furthermore, there was only one of them, yet the mud puddle was of such impressive size. It is unlikely that any animal known to me could have cleared it with only a single stride. Raising my eyes, I peered into the black shadows surrounding me, and I confess my heart skipped a beat, and the hand clutching the candle involuntarily trembled. However, I composed myself immediately, thinking how ridiculous it was to compare this shapeless impression in the mud with the track of any animal. Even an elephant could not have left such a mark. Therefore, I persuaded myself that I must not yield to senseless fears. Before proceeding further, I took care to memorize certain landmarks on the walls by which I might find the entrance to the tunnel on my way back. This precaution was not unnecessary, for the central cavern, as I have said, was intersected by side galleries. Satisfied with my direction and reassured by an inspection of my supply of candles and matches, I began to move slowly forward over the uneven, stony surface of one of the galleries. And now I come to the description of the sudden and terrible catastrophe. Path was crossed by a stream about 20 feet wide. For some time, I walked along it, hoping to find a place to cross to the other side without wetting my feet. At last, such a spot was found. A stone jutted out from the very middle of the stream, upon which I could step by taking a wide stride. That stride cost me dearly. The stone, evidently undermined by the water, rocked beneath me, and I plunged into the icy stream. My candle, of course, vanished. I was left floundering in absolute darkness. It was not without difficulty that I managed to struggle to my feet. In the first few moments, the incident amused rather than alarmed me. True, the candle had gone out and vanished in the current, but I had 2 spare candles remaining in my pocket. Without delay, I took one of them out, drew forth my matchbox, opened it, and only then did I realize with a shock of horror the plight I was in. The box was soaked through, and the matches would not strike. My heart felt as though it were being squeezed by fingers of ice. Around me lay an impenetrable darkness. It was so thick, so physically palpable, that I involuntarily raised my hand to my face to reassure myself of my own existence. I froze. By a tremendous effort of will, I managed to compose myself. I tried to reconstruct in my mind the path I had taken through the gallery. But alas, the landmarks I had memorized were high upon the walls. They could not be found by touch. And yet, I remembered the general position of the gallery walls and hoped, by following them, to grope my way back to the exit of the ancient Roman tunnel. Moving very slowly, constantly bruising myself against sharp, rocky outcrops, I began my search. However, little time had passed before the utter hopelessness of the undertaking became clear to me. In that black velvet darkness, all sense of direction is instantly lost. Before I had taken even a dozen steps, I was astray. The gurgling, the only sound I could hear, showed me where the stream was, but the moment I moved away from its bank, I lost my orientation. The idea of finding the way back through a labyrinth of limestone rocks in total darkness was clearly impossible. I sat down upon a stone and reflected on the dire situation in which I unexpectedly found myself. I had told no one of my intention to go to the Blue John Gap, and it was quite useless to expect that searchers would come here. I had to rely only on myself. I did not lose hope that, sooner or later, the matches would dry. When I fell into the stream, I was only half soaked. Fortunately, my left shoulder had remained above the water. Therefore, I tucked the matches under my armpit, hoping to dry them with the heat of my own body. But even then, I knew that I could not obtain a light for several hours. In short, there was nothing for me to do but wait. To my great joy, I found a few biscuits in one of my pockets, which I had taken before leaving home. I devoured them greedily and washed them down with water from the cursed stream that had caused my misfortunes. Then, having found by touch a comfortable dry spot for rest, I sat down, stretched out my weary legs, and began to wait patiently. It was terribly cold. My clothes were wet, and my teeth chattered, but I consoled myself with the thought that modern medicine recommends open windows and walks in any weather for my condition. After some time, lulled by the monotonous gurgling of the stream, I drifted into a troubled sleep. How long it lasted, I cannot say. Perhaps an hour, perhaps several. Suddenly, I started up on my hard bed. It seemed as though every nerve in me had tightened, and all my senses were sharpened to the extreme. A moment before, I had heard a strange, frightening sound. Oh, it was not the peaceful murmuring of the stream. A heavy silence followed, but that sound still rang in my ears. Could it be people searching for me? But they would surely have shouted. The sound that had awakened me was not like a human voice. I froze, trembling, holding my breath. The sound came again, then once more. Now it was continuous. Footsteps were heard. They belonged, beyond doubt, to a living creature. But what footsteps they were! Behind them, one could sense a vast weight and soft stepping, very strong and elastic feet. The steps, unceasing, deliberate, echoed ominously in the black, sepulchral darkness. They were approaching quickly and inevitably. A cold shiver ran down my spine, and my hair stood on end as I listened to the steady, stealthy tread. It was some kind of giant creature. Judging by its rapid pace, it oriented itself perfectly in the dark. I pressed myself against the rock, trying to merge with it. The footsteps sounded quite close, then stopped, and I heard vigorous lapping and gurgling. The great brute was drinking water from the stream. Then silence fell once more. It was broken only by heavy breathing and loud snorting. Had the animal sensed my presence? I gasped for breath. My head spun from the sickening stench emanating from this creature. Then the footsteps sounded again. They were now on my side of the stream. Rock debris rattled only a few yards away from me. Barely breathing, I cowered upon my rock. But then the footsteps began to recede. The sound of a loud splash reached me. The animal was crossing the stream. Finally, the sounds grew distant and vanished in the direction where I sensed the exit of the shaft to be. For a long time, I lay upon the rocks, paralyzed with terror. I thought of the roar I had recently heard from the depths of the gorge, of Armitage's fears which had seemed so ridiculous to me, and of the mysterious impression of the giant footprint in the mud. And now, the utterly incredible reality of everything that had recently seemed like absolute nonsense had been confirmed. Somewhere deep in the heart of the mountain, a strange and terrible creature was hiding. I had not seen it. I could say nothing about it, save that it was of gigantic proportions, yet remarkably agile and mobile. A fierce struggle was taking place within me between my senses, which believed in the reality of the monster, and my reason, which maintained that such a thing could not exist. At last, I was almost ready to convince myself that everything that happened was merely part of some morbid nightmare, and that the cause of this strange hallucination undoubtedly lay in my ill health and the wild conditions in which I now found myself. My God, only 2 or 3 minutes passed, and all my doubts vanished like smoke. I reached for my matches again and felt them. They were quite dry. Doubled over, holding my breath, I struck one of them. To my delight, it flared up at once. I lit the candle, and, glancing fearfully back at the dark depths of the shaft, hurried toward the tunnel. On my way, I had to pass the patch of mud where I had recently seen the giant footprint. Approaching it, I froze in amazement. 3 new prints had appeared in the mud. They were of incredible size. Their depth and outlines bore witness to the enormous weight of the unknown monster. A frantic fear seized me. Shielding the candle with my palm, I raced through the tunnel toward the exit of the shaft and did not stop until I had left both the Roman arch and the thick undergrowth far behind me. Gasping for breath, utterly exhausted, I threw myself onto the grass, which was lit by the peaceful glimmer of the stars. It was 3 o'clock in the morning when I reached home. Today, I feel completely broken and tremble at the mere memory of my terrible adventure. I have told no one anything yet. One must be extremely cautious with this. What would the poor Mrs. Ellerton think, and how would the uneducated farmers react if I told them of this occurrence? I must speak with someone who can understand me and give the necessary advice. April the 25th. The wild adventure in the Blue John Gap cost me 2 days spent in bed. I have already written that I need someone with whom I can consult. A few miles from me lives Dr. Mark Johnson. He was recommended to me by Professor Saunderson. It was to him I went as soon as I felt a little stronger and began to go out after my illness. I told Johnson in detail everything that had happened to me. He listened to me attentively, then examined me thoroughly, paying special attention to my reflexes and the pupils of my eyes. After the examination, however, the doctor refused to discuss my story, stating that it was not within his competence. But he gave me a letter of recommendation to a Mr. Picton in Castleton and advised me to go to him immediately and relate the whole story in detail. According to Johnson, Picton was exactly the man I needed and who could help me. Mr. Picton was evidently an important personage. This was evidenced by the solid proportions of the house, to the door of which was fixed a brass plate with his name. I was about to ring the bell when some unaccountable suspicion crept into my brain. Entering a small shop across the road, I asked the man behind the counter what he could tell me about Mr. Picton. "Oh, Mr. Picton is the best psychiatrist in Derbyshire," he exclaimed. "And over there, that is his asylum." I, of course, left Castleton at once and returned to my farm, cursing in my heart the unimaginative pedants incapable of believing in the existence of something that had never before fallen within their mole-like vision. Now, having calmed down a little, I admit, perhaps, that I treated Armitage no better than Dr. Johnson treated me. April the 27th. As a student, I was known as a brave and enterprising man. I remember once in Coltbridge, during a ghost hunt, I even spent a night in ambush in the attic of a house said to be haunted. Whether my current state is the result of age, after all, I'm only 35 years old, or whether this illness has so changed me, my heart flutters every time I remember the terrible gorge and the monster dwelling within it. What is to be done? I think of this day and night. If I remain silent, the secret will remain unsolved. If I make a public report of what has happened, I will immediately face the alternative of either a frantic panic throughout the district or a complete disbelief in my story. In the latter case, they might even inadvertently lock me away in a madhouse. On the whole, I think the best course is to wait and prepare for a new expedition, which must be better planned and more cautious than the first. As a first step, I drove to Castleton and purchased the most necessary items: a large acetylene lamp and a good double-barreled shotgun. The latter I took on hire and immediately bought a dozen heavy-duty cartridges for it, of a caliber that could bring down even a rhinoceros. Now I am ready to meet the cave dweller. If only I could regain a little strength, I would have done with him. But who is he? This question gives me no peace. How many of the most unthinkable theories have I put forward and then immediately cast aside? It seems like pure fantasy. And yet, the roar, the prints of giant paws, the heavy, prowling steps in the black tunnel. Involuntarily, I am reminded of the dragons of ancient legends. Perhaps they were not as fantastical as is commonly believed. It is likely that real facts lie at the foundation of these legends. Is it possible that I, alone among all mortals, am destined to draw back this mysterious veil? May the 3rd. The whims of our English spring have laid me in bed for several days. During these days, events have occurred whose sinister meaning, perhaps, no one but myself can explain. Lately, we have had dark, moonless nights. It is on such nights, according to Armitage, that the sheep disappear. And, imagined, the sheep truly have begun to vanish. 2 of them belong to Miss Ellerton, one to old Pearson, and another to Miss Moulton. For sheep in 3 nights, not a trace of them remains, and the whole district speaks of nothing but sheep-stealing gypsies. But something even more serious has happened. Armitage has vanished. He left his house late on Wednesday evening and has disappeared as if into thin air. Armitage is a solitary man, and his disappearance was not noticed at once. Most people believe he owed someone a great deal of money and fled. Perhaps he has found work in other parts. That is the general opinion. I have a different point of view on this matter. Would it not be more correct to suppose that the disappearance of the sheep prompted Armitage to take certain measures, which ended in his own destruction? He might, for example, have set an ambush near the tunnel for the beast that steals the sheep, and the terrible monster dragged him into the depths of the mountain. What an incredible end for a civilized Englishman of the 20th century. To me, this seems the most likely truth. But if that is the case, I am in some measure responsible for the death of this unfortunate man and for all the misfortunes that may yet occur. One thing is certain. The information I possess requires me to take urgent measures to prevent further calamities. This morning, I went to the local police station and told the whole story. The inspector recorded it in a thick ledger and thanked me with a most serious expression. But I had not even left the room before I heard a burst of laughter behind me. Without a doubt, the inspector was recounting my adventure. Clearly, I must take matters into my own hands. June the 10th. With great difficulty, lying in bed, I have taken up my diary, the last entry in which was made 6 weeks ago. I have survived terrible shocks, both physical and spiritual, yet I have achieved my goal. The danger that lurks in the Blue John Gap has vanished forever and shall never return. And it was I, a helpless invalid, who accomplished this for the common good. As far as it lies within my weak powers, I shall try to set down the events with the utmost clarity and fullness. The night of Friday, May the 3rd, was moonless and overcast. According to my suppositions, it is on such nights that the monster emerges onto the surface from the ancient shaft. At about 11 o'clock, I left the house, taking my lamp and shotgun with me. I first left a note on the table in my bedroom, stating that if I did not return in time, I should be searched for in the old shaft. Having reached the Blue John Gap, I hid among the rocks near the entrance arch, extinguished my lamp, and began to wait patiently, holding my shotgun at the ready. Time dragged on with agonizing slowness. Below, in the valley, lights flickered in the windows of the farmhouses. The tolling of the church bell, striking the hours in chapel in Le Frith, barely reached me. The darkness and the oppressive silence only intensified the feeling of loneliness and dread. I had to summon all my courage to overcome my fear and the urge to abandon the dangerous enterprise and hurry home to the farm. But the self-respect inherent in every man's nature compels him to follow his chosen path. This sense of personal dignity was my salvation. It strengthened my powers and my confidence in the struggle against the instinct of self-preservation, which urged me away from this place. I am glad that I had sufficient endurance. However dearly my venture cost me, my courage, at any rate, was beyond reproach. Midnight struck from the distant church. Then 1 o'clock. 2. This was the darkest hour of the night. Clouds drifted close to the earth, almost catching on the peaks of the hills, and not a single star was visible in the sky. Somewhere in the rocks, an owl cried out loudly, and then silence once more, only the creeping rustle of the wind. And suddenly I heard it. From the far depths of the gorge came muffled footsteps, soft, prowling, and yet so heavy. Stones rattled, crumbling under the mighty tread of a giant. The steps approached. They were already sounding nearby. The bushes crackled, and in the night, the vague outlines of a fantastic, primordial monster emerged. I was paralyzed by amazement and horror. I had expected to see something terrible, and yet I found myself utterly unprepared for what appeared before my eyes at that moment. I froze, afraid to move, as a huge black mass swept almost silently just a few yards from me and vanished into the darkness of the night. But I was firmly determined to wait for the monster's return and engage it. This time my nerves would not fail me. It would not pass me by with impunity. Clenching my teeth, I vowed this to myself. My shotgun, with hammers cocked, was aimed at the entrance to the shaft. An amazing silence reigned. From the direction of the sleeping village, where this embodiment of horror roamed at large, not a sound could be heard. I was nervous, for I could not know how far the monster had gone, what it was doing, or when it would return. And yet, I nearly missed a second time. Nothing heralded the appearance of the beast, stepping softly upon the grass. It appeared suddenly when I least expected it. The black, fast-moving mass swept past me again, heading toward the entrance of the shaft. And again, my will was paralyzed. My finger froze dead upon the trigger of the gun. With a tremendous effort, I shook off my stupor and, throwing up the gun, fired at the receding black shadow. This happened at the very moment when the monster, having forced its way through the brushwood, was at the mouth of the shaft. In the light of the bright flash of the shot, I caught a fleeting glimpse of a shaggy mountain. Coarse, bristling fur, gray on top and almost white below, a huge body on short and very thick bowed legs. The vision lasted but a moment. Then came the roar of falling stones as the monster plunged into the shaft. Casting aside my fear, I switched on my powerful lamp and, holding the gun at the ready, rushed in after it. The lamp flooded the tunnel with a brilliant light, quite unlike the yellow flicker of the candle with which I had trudged here 12 days before. Racing headlong through the tunnel, I did not lose sight of the monster running ahead of me. It moved in great bounds, swaying from side to side. The massive body filled the entire space between the tunnel walls, with its fur hanging in long, thick mats and fluttering as it ran. The animal resembled a giant, unshorn sheep, but in height it exceeded the largest of elephants. Now it seems incredible even to myself that I ventured to pursue such a horror into the bowels of the earth. But when a man's blood boils with the realization that his prey is escaping, The primitive instincts of the hunter awaken within him, and caution and fear retreat. Clutching the gun in my hand, forgetting everything else, I ran with all my might after the monster. I noticed that the animal was very fast and agile. Alas, very soon I was to learn from my own experience that it was also cunning. Imagining that the beast was running in a panic and that I had only to pursue it, I never even considered that it might turn and attack me. I have written before that the tunnel leads into a large central cavern. Extremely excited, I burst into it, fearing only one thing: losing the animal's trail. And at that moment, the monster suddenly turned toward me. A second later, we stood face to face. What I saw in the dazzling light of the lamp is forever seared into my brain. The beast reared up on its hind legs like a bear and froze before me, huge and furious. In no nightmare had my imagination ever conceived anything like it. I said the beast rose on its hind legs like a bear. It did resemble one, only it was 10 times larger than the biggest bear living upon the earth. It had long, curved limbs with hooked claws, a lumpy and very thick-looking hide covered in dense fur. But the most terrible thing was the enormous, blood-red, gaping maw set with fangs, and the white, bulging eyes shimmering in the blinding light of the lamp. Giant paws swung up over my head, and with a roar, the monster threw itself upon me. I recoiled, dropped the lamp, and collapsed onto the stones, unconscious. I came to my senses back at the Ellertons' farm. 2 days had passed since that terrible incident in the Blue John Gap. All night long, I had lain breathless in the shaft. I was found to have a slight concussion. My left arm and 2 of my ribs were broken. Fortunately, the note I had left was found in the morning, and immediately a group of 12 farmers rushed to search for me. I was discovered in an unconscious state and carried home. Not a trace remained of the strange beast. Not even a bloodstain was found that might have testified that my bullet had struck its mark. Save for my own disastrous condition and the tracks in the mud within the tunnel, nothing remains to confirm my accounts. 6 weeks have passed now. I am able once again to go out and warm myself in the sunshine. Just opposite me rises the sheer slope of the hill, and the gray limestone crags are visible. There upon that slope is the dark fissure, the entrance to the ancient shaft, the Blue John Gap. But that cavern shall never again be a source of terror. Nevermore shall any mysterious creature crawl forth from it to invade the world of men. Scientists and educated intellectuals of Dr. Johnson's ilk may laugh at me, but the local farmers, simple folk, have never once doubted my truthfulness. On the day after my consciousness returned, hundreds of farmers gathered at the entrance to the Blue John Gap. This is what the Castleton Courier wrote regarding the matter. Our correspondent, as well as several enterprising and courageous individuals who arrived from Matlock, Buxton, and other places, demanded in vain to be allowed to descend into the shaft to examine it from end to end and finally verify the account of Dr. James Hardcastle. The local villagers took a different course. From early morning, they diligently set about blocking the entrance to the shaft with stones. A steep hillside rises beside it. Hundreds of volunteers rolled huge boulders and fragments of rock down the slope until the cavern was completely barricaded. Thus ended a tragic episode which had generated such great excitement in the minds of the inhabitants of our region. Incidentally, local residents have divided into 2 camps in their judgment of this matter. Some believe that poor health and perhaps some brain damage resulting from the tubercular process caused Dr. Hardcastle to suffer strange hallucinations. In the opinion of the adherents of this theory, Dr. Hardcastle descended into the shaft obsessed with the fixed idea of seeking fantastical monsters, and they explain his injuries as a fall from the rocks. The opposing side asserts that the legend of a mysterious monster lurking in the gorge was born long before the arrival of the Honorable Mr. Hardcastle in our parts. Many farmers regard Dr. Hardcastle's account and his injuries as further confirmation of the real basis of this legend. Such is the state of affairs, and so mysterious it shall remain, for there is no possibility of providing a more or less scientific substantiation for the events described above. Thus, I repeat, wrote the Castleton Courier. It might have been more reasonable for the newspaper, before printing such an article, to have sent its correspondent to me. I was a direct participant in the events. I have analyzed them as no one else could, and I surely would have helped to remove some of the perplexities that inevitably arise when explaining the drama described, thereby bringing the matter closer to scientific recognition. Therefore, I shall attempt to provide the only true interpretation which, I believe, is capable of shedding light on this affair. My hypothesis may seem improbable, but no one, at least, can claim it to be nonsensical. My viewpoint arose, as is evident from my diary, long before the events in the Blue John Gap. It supposes that in this part of England, there must exist a vast subterranean lake, or perhaps even a sea, fed by numerous streams flowing into the bowels of the earth through porous limestone formations. But it is well known, where there is much water, there must also be significant evaporation, followed by the settling of moisture in the form of mist or rain. And the latter always presupposes the existence of plant life, which, in turn, allows for the possibility of animal life in the depths of the earth. I believe that the flora and fauna beneath the ground originated from those species which existed in the early periods of our planet's history, when the connection between the subterranean and the surface worlds was more accessible. Subsequently, this connection was severed, and the animal world of the underground depths evolved in accordance with new conditions of existence. These changes affected all creatures, including the monster I beheld. It is possible that it was an ancient cave bear. For many centuries, the surface and subterranean inhabitants of the earth were separated from one another. But then a breach formed in the depths of the earth's crust, allowing one of the denizens of the deep to emerge through the ancient Roman mine onto the surface. Like all inhabitants of the underground world, the animal had lost its sight, but this loss was undoubtedly compensated for by nature in some other way, perhaps through a keen sense of smell. The creature could find its way in total darkness and prey upon the sheep grazing on the slopes of the nearby hills. As for the dark nights it chose for its raids, according to my theory, this can be explained by the extremely painful effect of light upon the huge, bulging eyes of an animal accustomed to the gloom. Most likely, the bright light of my lamp saved my life when I found myself one-on-one with it. Such is my explanation of this riddle of nature. I'll leave the facts I have gathered to your discretion. Choose to believe them. Do so. Prefer to doubt. Then doubt. Your trust or your incredulity can no longer change the facts I have set forth, nor can they offend one whose task in this world is already finished. Thus ends the strange tale of the late Dr. James Hardcastle.